opening weekend to the 2023 men's NCAA March Madness tournament. Uh, Nothing really happened. It was just chalk as usual. Chalk, 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 chalk. it's This would have been one of the greatest opening weekends we've ever seen. We saw 15 seeded Princeton, as we talked about the other night, take down Arizona. Then they absolutely smashed my Mizzou Tigers on Saturday, and now they're in the Sweet 16 against Creighton. Whoever would have seen that happening? That is going to be very, very interesting. We saw number one Kansas get knocked off by Arkansas. So we've got two number ones who didn't even make the round of 16. We've only got two number twos left. Really, if you think about it, outside of Princeton, we've got only one double-digit seed left in the field. You got a handful of threes, fours. I think there's a five in there somewhere. You got three SEC teams, and Texas, who next year is going to be a fourth SEC team, one in each bracket right now. But we also saw the most historic upset in the history of the tournament. Yes, I am counting St. Peter's run last year to the Elite Eight. I am also taking into account Princeton's first two wins already this year, and Florida Gulf Coast, their run to the Final Four several years ago. Loyola's run to the Final Four several years ago, and that was Fairleigh Dickinson over number one Purdue on Friday night, and almost pulled out another one last night. Now, when UMBC beat Arizona back in the 2018 tournament, DeAndre Hunter was not suiting up for Arizona. He had broken a bone in his hand or his wrist or something of that nature. I don't remember exactly what, but Hunter was not in that game, and that's part of how UMBC ran out to the 20-point victory, which was the first time it's ever happened in the history of the men's tournament. Now, remember, in the women's tournament, Harvard upset, I want to say it was Stanford years earlier. I want to say it was like 2008, a 16 overall one. And the more historic thing about it, when Harvard did it, is that in the women's tournament, they don't go to regional sites until you get to regionals. So the first two rounds are at the host city. So Harvard beat Stanford, a number one seed, on Stanford's home floor. And we're not talking like regionally in Stanford or have them playing at a major arena. I'm talking like where the Stanford women played 16 or 17 times a year. That's where Harvard went in and beat them. But that's not the case in the men's game because of the way that the field has expanded, and then also with the bubble inference and regional sites kind of expanding out in the last 15 years or so. But Zach Edey was his usual Zach Edey self. Edey had a game high 22, and then Purdue decided, instead of Edey dominating, where he was the tallest guy on the floor by several inches and is going to be a top 5 pick in June's draft, Purdue decided to shoot from the outside at an incredible pace. Problem is none of them really went down. Purdue only shot 5 of 26 from deep, and that's 19.2%. And Fairleigh Dickinson ended up with 11 steals, which actually turned out to be the decider. And this wasn't like when Princeton beat Arizona the other night, where Arizona jumped out to a double-digit lead, and then Princeton clawed their way back in. This was something that this game was very close all night. Purdue only led this game by 5 at halftime, and then took the lead with only a couple minutes left to go, and then kind of pushed it from there. Found great ways to chase down loose balls, keep Edey from getting to those boxed out very well, hit their free throws, and they're moving on. And the hilarity that The Knights were not even supposed to be in this tournament. The only reason they are even in this tournament to begin with, and they are a 16 seed and had to be one of the first four in. They beat Texas Southern last Wednesday in Dayton, and then just had to go to Columbus. So very short travel for them. Whereas Purdue was in Indianapolis for the Big Ten tournament, and then it's a short trip, from Indianapolis over to Columbus for their opening round games as they were anticipating. Um, but Fairleigh Dickinson didn't even win their regular season title nor their conference title, and that was Merrimack College out of New Jersey. The NCAA has a rule that they eliminated the transfer protocol a couple of years ago, where you actually had to redshirt for a year or a semester or whatever it might be. When teams jump divisions, like if a team jumps from Division 3 to Division 2 or Division 2 to Division 1 like Merrimack did, there's a 4-year probationary period to where they cannot participate in postseason. Certain instances where teams have done that, they've been eligible to compete in the NIT, but they're not eligible for, or they'll play in the CBI or the CIT when it was a thing, but they don't play in they cannot play in the men's or women's field of 68, formerly 64. So this is a benefit for FDU to be able to get in there, beat Texas Southern pretty handily, and then pull the biggest upset we've ever seen. Now, there are a lot of people that said of the 4 number 1 seeds, Purdue was the least deserving. You probably could have. There's some people that even say, yeah, you could have pulled them out and maybe put UCLA in as a 1, possibly a Marquette. But we all saw what Marquette did yesterday against Michigan State. And UCLA just keeps rolling, and now we've got, what a lot of people are hoping for is the game of the year between UCLA and Gonzaga on Friday night. That'll be the late game. Purdue was actually heading home. Michigan State is I believe the lone Big Ten team still left standing, so it's Tom Izzo again. But Zach Edey's played his last game in a Purdue uniform. He's going to be a front runner. He's certainly a finalist for the Naismith Player of the Year on the men's side. And even though FDU lost yesterday to Florida Atlantic, it was still also a very close game because FAU only led by 5 at the half. The final margin of victory was only 7. And Fairleigh Dickinson was a 16-point underdog in that game compared to the 23 that they were against Purdue back on Friday night. I know that's actually part of the reason why we went up late 15 minutes on the Wise Guys show on Saturday night with the Wisey Awards, was because Mike actually had to put his son Bobby down, and I had to finish watching the end of this Purdue game. Now, I was not as nearly amped up as I was when Princeton took down Arizona on Saturday. Plus, also by then it was like 9 o'clock, and I didn't really want to go that crazy, knowing I had to preserve my energy for the podcast. But it was also something that I didn't have nearly as much animosity against Purdue as I do Arizona, with Arizona being one of my 3 most hated programs in all of college basketball. Purdue I'm rather indifferent on. I do remember that I hated Gene Cady, but even though I respected the hell out of him during his heyday back in the 80s and 90s, Matt Painter's a very good head coach himself. But regardless of what you think about Purdue, whether they were deserving, they really should not have lost that game, but then changed the entire game plan going away from Edey when they had to, and they're heading home. Even though FDU is heading home as well, it's definitely something that's going to be talked about and brought up in every highlight package from now until somebody does it again. And the fact that also Fairleigh Dickinson was that close to being the first 16 seed to reach the Sweet 16 yesterday just shows you just the parity that's involved now in college basketball. That yes, you've got the NIL, you've got the parity. Things are much more wide open. When the defending champions go out in the second round, when Kentucky doesn't make it out of the weekend, when Arizona doesn't make it out of the weekend, when if you were to reseed everybody right now, UCLA should have been a 1. Baylor was seated too high. Marquette was probably seated too high. Houston definitely looks to be somebody who should be in the Final Four with the way that their bracket is setting up. Alabama, their run looks a little bit easier, but there's still a lot of people, myself included, that are kind of waiting on the other shoe to drop for Alabama here, especially now that the competition is going to amp up a little bit more and the pressure is going to start building a little bit, because this is a program that has only had one Sweet 16 appearance. I want to say like between 98 and a couple of years ago, and now they're, I think, like in their second or third in the last 5 years or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I got to go back and double check the stats, but I'm not here to talk about Alabama. We're talking about Fairleigh Dickinson, and people think it waters down the tournament to see all of these upsets, and everyone loves the upsets in the first couple of rounds, and you think it actually gives poor games the second round, third round, etc. Nobody saw Princeton smashing Missouri by as much as they did yesterday. Nobody saw Furman doing what they did against Virginia, even though they didn't put up nearly as convincing of a performance against San Diego State, over the weekend. Creighton looks to be a team that could potentially make a Final Four run, and people were thinking, okay, they might be a one and done. Just shows you why this is the greatest tournament in really all of sports, professional and college. Some people, for a long time, I was biased saying that it was the Stanley Cup playoffs, but the Stanley Cup playoffs are the hardest tournament in pro sports with the greatest trophy, whereas the greatest overall tournament is the NCAA tournament, because it actually shows the more you expand the field, the better the quality of the game gets, and the more you actually have to write about, which is why the basketball playoffs are so watered down, because of letting all these teams in, and then having the play-in tournament, and then you actually have guys resting. Hey, we're up 3-1. We might want to sit this guy for a game. The talent pool is so, again, watered down in the NBA, where you're going to have the same guys year after year after year, and that's some of the issues with pro sports. It's having the same teams year after year after year after year, and it actually makes that Cinderella story, amp up a little bit more, hoping that they can maybe turn a corner at that point. Whereas the NCAA tournament, you've got that one and done, back against the wall type of mentality, and one bad performance, your season is a complete wash. This season is now going to look like a failure to Purdue, even though they won the Big Ten tournament and the Big Ten regular season tournament and were number one in the country for a good chunk of this season. They were number one. They got knocked out of a number one. They came back, got a number one, won the Big Ten regular season title. Struggled in a lot of games. The only team that they really kind of put away and put some distance with was Ohio State, and that was in a quarterfinal, basically ending the Buckeye season. So thank you, Purdue, for that. But it's something that everyone thought that they should have walked over Fairleigh Dickinson by 25, 30 points, whereas a lot of teams really didn't do that. Alabama was in a dogfight, up until the midway point of the second half, and then really started to pull away on their end. UCLA was about the only major, I want to say 1 or 2 seed that really just kind of went out and set the tone when they pounded UNC Asheville in the opening round, and then went out and took care of business in their second round series. And now this is why we get them and Gonzaga for the second time in 3 years. And then now, some of the other stories that come out today, that Iona fires their coach, who is now suing them, and then signs signs. I'm sorry, St. John's does, and then goes out and signs Rick Pitino away from Iowa. Now getting him back into a Power Six type of conference. Um, so now we see the coaching carousel going on. Is somebody going to, try and lure Shaka Smart away from Marquette? Could the Fairleigh Dickinson coach turn around and actually convert this into, a larger job like what Shaka Smart did with the job he did with VMI? Could Chris Holtmann be on his way out at Ohio State? Could one of these teams, like maybe Furman or the gentleman at Fairleigh Dickinson, could they be in line to maybe jump up? If somebody bolts a mid-major and goes to in Ohio State, or if there's an opening, does somebody come in and now fill fill that space left behind? And let's for the sake of argument, let's say Ohio State lets Holtmann go and then maybe goes out and gets somebody from the Big East. Does the gentleman from Fairleigh Dickinson or Princeton or whoever then fill that spot at that Big East school, while that Big East school coach makes the jump? And this is what makes college so interesting, because not all these guys are going to get the NIL deals to be able to go and move and pick and choose wherever they want to go. And the last 2 weekends of this tournament are going to be extremely fun to watch, especially with the fact that you don't have as many blue bloods now as you did before. Really, you've got no Duke. UConn's still there. You've got UCLA. You've got Gonzaga. There's not a whole lot else. Houston's come on in recent years. Creighton's getting there, but can never quite get over the hump. Alabama, we talked about, who is going to, shock some people here. Princeton, who's to say that they don't get by and get into the Elite Eight themselves? And it's a puncher's chance here and there and everywhere. So let me know what you guys think. What are you guys looking forward to the last 2 weekends here? If you had to reseed, who would be your number ones? Who's going to the Final Four? Who do you think is going to win it? Is your bracket either in the paper shredder, or did you actually use it for kindling in your fireplace after most of the country got another snowstorm this weekend? So I will be back with you here a little later on this week. If you missed the YZs, we had a blast. Our big announcement is starting in early April. We're going twice a week. I believe our first episode is going to be Wednesday night, April the 5th. Which is actually going to cut into my AEW time on Wednesdays, but that's actually only going to be temporary until we actually get a better idea on that set. But we hope you guys will go back and catch the on-demand. I, again, will catch you a little later on this week, and we'll have more information as the 2-week Wise Guys shows get closer. So take care, everyone, and enjoy this weekend's worth of games if I don't talk to you by then.